All right, we'll get started. So, week 8. I'm going to take a little break from learning about elements and principles. Well, one, we're done with elements. And then next week, we'll move on to principles. But what we're also going to add in now is we're going to start doing some design work. 2 small designs, one using Illustrator, one using InDesign. I want everybody to become familiar and start using the programs more and more and more, and not to feel shy with them. And that's partly why we do the introduction, the design practice is you're opening files, you're checking them out, you're moving things around, you're seeing how it looks. So nothing's new. Nothing is new to you at all. So it's all good and you work. So today we're going to go over the layout lecture. I'm going to talk to you about a layout. I'm going to talk to you about like all the important parts of the layout from here on out in your design career. These are words that you'll be using, ideas that you'll be using for every time you design a document. They are the standards. It is the way we design. And later on, when you build a career, these are the things that will save you money or cost you money as a designer, or maybe even get you fired. It goes that deep. If you don't know about this stuff, you don't use them correctly, it can be a pretty big embarrassment. So it's sort of simple. What I'm going to do today is we'll do the layout lecture. I'll do the graphic design layout. And then on Thursday, we'll do the InDesign and the design practice, just to split them up so you don't get too long-winded. The assignments don't take that long. It's just reading through and doing it. But I want you to recognize what you're doing, how you're doing it, why you're doing it. So we will get into now the layout defined. This is all the parts of the layout that you need to know about, be able to speak about. These are the definitions that graphic designers use. They are in alphabetical order. So like the final one is like the most, like one of the ones I talk about the most. But the first one is very, very important as well. So let's go through what would be considered a layout in all the parts and pieces with no artwork. It's just the layout and why we need to know about all these items. The first one is the artboard. That's the standard artboard in Illustrator, InDesign, and Photoshop. I believe they're all considered artboards. The artboard is that when you open up the program and you open up a document and it's the white one floating in the middle of a sea of gray, the white part is the artboard. That is the place where your art goes. It's called the artboard for a reason. Sometimes they'll call it a canvas or a page, but artboard is a common used term. And anything on the artboard will show up in the final. Anything not on the artboard, depending on how we do it, won't show up. But the artboard is the most, like, that's where your art goes. So think of it like a canvas. If you are painting on a canvas, like think of fine art people, so, wearing a beret, painting. Anything off the canvas doesn't show up. It's only what's on the canvas, what's on the artboard that shows up. So that is the main one. When somebody says, set up the artboard at this size, that's the artboard. The other thing to note when setting up, when we talk about a document, we talk width by height. A standard piece of paper, when you say it, 8.5 by 11. It's width by height. You need to always double check that. If you're working with a client and they blurt out something, you need to double check. What's the width? What's the height? There are times that this comes up when somebody's just like, if they just blurt out 8.5 by 11, but they actually mean 11 by 8.5, you have to just kind of double check. There should always be something, a W and an H next to it with height. 8.5 H 11 or 8.5 W 11 H. So start to get used to that. When we talk about an artboard and you're talking to fellow designers or anybody else, the artboard is the width by the height. That's the artboard. It's our friend. Bleed. All right. This is important to know. So when we print, what you see is on the artboard, right? We are used to maybe seeing photographs taken and stuff like that, or when we get our printed items, it's perfect. When you have a piece and it goes to print, they actually print it on a piece of paper that is bigger than your artboard. So if you have an 8.5 by 11 document, they may print it on a piece of paper that is 9 by 12. And what that allows them to do is then cut it exactly to the size you want, allowing for artwork to spill off, but not leave an open white line around it. So when you're dealing, so say I want a cool piece of artwork and I want it to be the whole background to be black, I would actually pull the whole background from the bleed to the bleed and not just on the artboard. Because what happens is when they cut it out, like there's giant machines that run these, you know, like that's, you know what they sound, and it's flying through. Some of it, they shift. Each piece of paper has a tendency to shift a little bit. It's not absolutely perfect. And then when they cut it on these things called guillotines. And the guillotine can't be perfect either. So if you want color from edge to edge and you don't pull the bleed, it's called pulling bleed, you might end up with a white edge or two white edges depending on the shift. And then that white edge may be on one side on some of them and then slowly migrate to the other side or the up and the down because of the shifting that happens within large printing operations. They can't, it's not like your photo. And actually saying that, if you ever get photos printed at Walgreens or whatever, you should look at what's printed compared to what you sent them. And you'll see that they actually cut off part of your image in order to have it go all the way across. That's how I make my Christmas card. And I have a special document set up just for Walgreens that has an offset, so I know what part they're cutting off of the image because they scale it from one corner and then it runs through their machine. And I know which corner to scale to make sure that I get everything I want and I include the proper amount of bleed when they do it. So then I don't get a shift or I don't get any white showing up. So that's what the bleed is about. Bleed, just kind of like it's bleeding past the edge, flowing past the edge. I don't know where bleed comes from. Yeah, but it's just the fact that it flows past the edge and then we cut off and we'll have a nice clean document. So when we work, we always work with bleed. Crop marks, these guys. These are actually Japanese crop marks. It's my preference. You can just set it really easily. I like the double crop. It's like a double crop mark. Either ones work. There's a standard and there's a double one. Back in the day when we were doing more hand cut stuff and I was doing stuff, it was just easier for me to follow these than it was just a dash on each side. Not a big deal, whatever. The crop marks tell the printer where you want your piece cut out. Again, they're printing on a piece of paper larger than your document. Then they're running it through another machine. So the piece of paper may be that big. Then they're running it through a machine that will cut it out on the crop marks. So there, you don't need to then, which is what everybody kind of thinks you do, is you don't have to put like an outline on your piece to be like, oh, cut it out on my outline. Well, no, what you do is we're going to cut out on the crop marks because the crop marks, no matter what, Again, we're talking about if there's a shift in the document, there's enough bleed. But if you're like, oh, just cut it out around this border, they can't align that border every time. So you have crop marks, which show the printer where to cut things off, but are spaced outside of the print area. So there's no way a crop mark would ever show up in your final piece printed unless there is a huge mistake. So the crop marks are the cut off part. What cut off everything from this point, off. And that's what they're for. So the crop marks tell, and these can be all different. And these get more intricate depending on die lines and depending on maybe you want something. A die line kind of sometimes refers to if it's not a rectangular document. If I've got a curve, then I have a die line, and then the crop marks are situated to interact with that die line a little bit more. That's a little bit more advanced. You learn about that in packaging, but you will use crop marks. So the crop marks are outside indicator of where the artwork should end on the artboard. So you don't need to show a line where the artboard is, and the artwork can flow past. Grids. Grids are there. You can use them, you can make them, you can build them, but grids are used within graphic design to help the design stay orderly. There are graphic designers who are like nuts about grids. When I say nuts, like you can go on Amazon or go to a library and you can find specific books that are just about using grids within graphic design. How to set up a grid, how to do like all sorts of different kinds of grids that will like kind of help your piece always looks organized, always be like modular in its setup. They're nice to use. I don't always use them, but I know how to turn them on and off. You can make them yourself. You can edit them within the document, but that's what they're there for. So if you have, a bunch of pieces and I'm like, oh, I want, like 4 items. And I want them, oops, sorry, delete. No, I want that one, I want that one, delete. And I want them like, oh, I want a bunch of them. But when I place them, I want to make sure like, oh, they're all equally spaced and all equally in the same area. I don't have to do anything if the grid is there. And it allows me to set that up properly to know like whenever I put one of these down, I'm always putting it, adjacent on the grid from like one whole block away from the other whole block. And like I said, it's not like you have to draw them in there. They're there. And then so you can use that grid to help you design, to help you make sure like, am I keeping equal spacing between all of my design elements no matter where they are? Well, if I have a grid on here, I guarantee that I am. And like I said, it's just a quick little switch. You can turn it off and you can adjust them within the programs that you use. And the grids don't show up. So the grids don't show up in the final piece. So far, the artboard doesn't show up. The bleed mark doesn't show up. Just the bleed pass, depending on how you export it. The crop marks will only show up on a giant print. The grids will never show up. You set the grids to not show up. They won't print. Same as for guides. Guides are similar to grids. You can pull guides from the side of a document to help you figure out where you want items to be. I generally pull a guide from center point to center point, so I know exactly where the middle of my document is. And they don't show up. They're there for you. They're there to help out when you're setting up. Say I have an image here and I want the text to be, the same as the image. Boom. If I pull these guides, then I can pull my text box to match my image box, and they're just working nicely together. Guides, again, don't show up in the document. They're usually like like this cyan color or light cyan, and you use them as needed and you just leave them there and it doesn't hurt anybody, and you can move them, delete them, add them, subtract them. I don't ever not pull at least 2 to find center. It's just a habit. It's just developing good design habits when you do this. And that's like one of the big ones for this. Probably the one you'll hear about me talk about the most is the margin. The margin is another indicator. It is the indication between important information and the edge of the document where things will get cut off. Every piece you design needs to have a margin. You need to follow your margin. What the margin is about is this. When you design something and say we want this square, you need a space around the piece before the edge of the document. The reason being is everybody loves to just jam an image right here or put important information right on the edge when we're beginning designers. There's a chance that all this will get cut off. What the margin is alerting you as a designer is anything past this pink line might get cut off. It might not be seen. It might not work out. So if you have text, a body, a copy, I don't know if I can do body copy. If I have copy and I put it, I have to do that left side. Let's see. Oh, it's not letting me change the size of the box. If I put it up here, anything past the margin, this whole line may get cut off. People love to put their text right up to the edge of the document. I can't get this past now. But when you design, and I have you design documents, I will put in a margin, and then you'll hear me say, why is the image or why is the text past that margin? The margin is a safe zone. It indicates a safe zone. It won't get cut off. It won't be hidden by a fold, and it allows room. It's very uncomfortable to place items very close to the edge of a document. When you see a final document, if things are too close to the edge, it creates visual tension. It's what it's called, and it just doesn't work well. So once you start using a margin, you always use a margin, and you never go past the margin unless it's a design purpose. You can have things spill off the edge. If you have a photograph and you want it to go to the edge, you actually then will bleed it off and make sure that whatever is past isn't needed, and whatever is in this margin zone is so-so, and the rest of it is good. Yeah, so that's the margin. And then we also, the other part is we'll develop margins around specific items. There's a tendency to put text right next to an image and it's almost touching. And I'll get into that later where we talk about every piece, every design element within a design piece has a margin, and you should respect that margin for each one. A lot of times I'll call the margin is personal space. Do you want somebody like talking, 1 inch from your face, breathing on you in your nose when they talk? Or do you want some personal space? Design elements need personal space, and a design needs some space to breathe. And so you can read sections and see, I want you to read this first, read this second, read this first. Like this entire document has a margin that I built in. I've spaced things out. The text this red line never gets too close to the text. It's, circling that. There's, breathing room in between each one of these. That's margins. Margins are everywhere in design, and it's a very important key takeaway. So you will start hearing about this now more and more. I'll start using these terms. The artboard. What is your artboard? Did you have bleed? Where are your crop marks? These are the things you. Where are your crop marks? I won't talk about grids, but I'll be like, did you use a grid? Like maybe you should, set things up a little bit better. Try a grid. Pull the guides. How come, something's not perfectly centered that you wanted perfectly centered? Why didn't you just pull some guides to show you where that is? The margin you'll hear me talk about the most in terms of the full design. So that is all the parts of the layout that you should now know and become familiar with and be able to work with. Let's do your first one. We'll do the Illustrator project. All this is a walkthrough. It's all you need to do is walk through this. Now I'm going to switch this to a different screen so I can read it. And I'm going to open up Illustrator, as you should do, like when it's time. And then we're just going to go. So the first one, you just click New File. Create a new file. We want a print document, so you can hit Print. And I want it 24 inches wide by 36 inches tall. So over here, this is set the points, not inches, but it's got an arrow. I click here and I go to inches. Then I go to my document, or not my document, but what it says is I want it 24 inches wide by 36 inches tall. I don't need to mess with anything. The orientation is fine. I want it tall. And I only need one artboard for this project. Bleed. The document needs to have a 1/4 inch of bleed. That's 0.25 inches. All you have to do is type in 0.25 and hit enter. Oh, I didn't mean to hit enter. Sorry, that was too quick. New file. Print. 24, tab 36. You can hit tab 0.25. If I click on to the next one, what I mean is it auto populates as soon as you put one in. And if you want your bleed different, which generally your bleed would only be different if you're doing a magazine spread or something that has a fold in it, which you would change these, which you unlock those. Now to go down, we are all good from here. All right. And I'm going to hit create. Now I have a document that has a bleed and an artboard. Now I'm going to create a layer and I'm going to call it margin. So right here, layer 1, I'm going to double click on it and call it margin. That layer will have a box that is 22 inches wide by 34 inches tall. The box will be perfectly centered on the artboard. The box will have no fill and a 1-point magenta stroke. Lock the layer. So I can now go here to the rectangle tool and I can quickly draw. I'm going to go to properties and here, transform. I can type in the numbers that I put. And I said 22 by 34. 22, tab, 34. All right. I want the fill. I'm just clicking directly onto that box. Fill, nothing. Stroke, magenta, 1 point. All right. Now, all I have to do is move it until I get that little indicator right in the center that said centered. And I'm done with that for now. We're coming back to it later. I'm going to lock it so I don't mistakenly hit it. Now I'm going to create a layer and I'm going to go down here to the plus. Create new layer. It's all the way down at the layers. It's all the way down at there. There's a little plus, create new layer. And I'm going to click on it and call it crop marks. Now for this one, I'm going to make a rectangle the size of the document. So I can go to properties. It's 24 by 36. It kind of auto sets when if you kind of click in the edge, it knows where to go. I'm going to make sure that it doesn't have a fill and it does not have a stroke. And then I'm going to click on this FX right here and just hit crop marks. And you just leave that alone. And it added a set of crop marks marking the page. And if you move that, it moves the crop marks. But there you go. That's how you create the crop marks. And I can lock that layer. I go up. So you can turn on the grid and you can turn on the ruler. The grid shows a lot. So I'm going to go to View, Show Grid. There's the grid. Later on, you can turn this on and off, but I want you to know it, kind of look at it, use it. The next thing to do is turn on the rulers. Now the rulers, rulers down here. So View, Rulers, Show Rulers. Those pull in from this side, one on each side. And it's in inches, and it shows us what to do. Now what I'm going to do is you can pull a guide. One that says, I'm going to go in that ruler, and I'm going to click and drag. And see that little dashed line comes out? And I'm going to go halfway. So I want from 0, 18. And I'm going to let go. And it makes that cyan line, and that's a guide. And I'm going to pull one to the middle here to split my board in half. Now I know where the center of my board is, my center of my artboard. And if you want to pull more, you can pull more, you can do whatever you want, but these are really great to use. And then there's a couple of ways to use them. I have mine, once I draw them, they're set. But you can go to View and then Guides. If I hit Unlock Guides, I can then actually go on, I can grab the guide and delete them. The reason I don't like that is I end up, if there's something and I do a full grab and it grabs the guide, then my guides go away. So it's just a personal preference, but that's how you pull a guide. And now I'm going to go back to lock guides. Now they're just locked. Anytime I pull one from the side, it stays in place. And if you want a second layer for that, you can just call this layer guides, or you can do that within the crop marks. Doesn't matter. And the guides will always be on top. So actually it should be in the crop marks. So it should, in the instructions, they'll be in your crop marks. All right. So now I'm going to pull a layer. I'm going to make another layer, and I'm going to simply call it logo. I'm going to lock that. I'm going to make another layer. I'm going to call it images. I'm going to create another layer. Paragraph. I'm going to do another layer, call it dates. Another layer, headliners. Oh, don't worry. There's a reason for all these. You'll be coming back to this. All right. Now, this is the tricky part. It's not even that tricky, but everybody forgets to do this. I'm going to pull the margin layer, the first one I put on, all the way to the top. I can just click and drag it all the way to the top. Now, with it selected, I'm going to go to the little hamburger menu here and click go to template. And it changes the eyeball into this little square thing. What that is doing is that magenta line won't print. It will act like a guide. It's setting a margin, but it will never print. So you can set you can build a whole bunch of like helper setups that will never print. And that's what that template is for. Now, finally, I want you to create a layer, last layer, call it name. Grab that little T tool, and you can just click, type your name, scale it up so we can see it. And this is just by, when you scale it though, make sure you hold down Shift. And then look, like when I put it, you can start to get it centered, use those things to get it centered nicely. And there you go. Now I want you to save this file as an Illustrator file. But you go to File, Save As. You can save it on your computer because I don't think everybody has cloud. You can save it to your Google Drive as well, wherever you want to save it. And it's, you know, JSCAJA _ poster _ layout. And this is the Illustrator file. And I'm going to hit save. And I want the best of the best. Okay. And then the next one you're going to do is the PDF. And so you've done this before. So it's File, Save As, save on your computer, PDF, knows the name, save. You can keep it at high quality print, or you can do press quality. Either one of those are good. Save PDF. Mine pops up in Adobe Acrobat so I can check it. And there is my blank document ready to go. I do want to point out for some of you, close that file, open. If you're like, if you hear a response from me, like the crop marks are there, there's something turned on and you need to turn it off for this part of the project. You'll need it in the future when sending stuff to print, but I want to show you how to do it. So if I do File, Save As, save on a computer, I want the PDF, save, replace. Now, if I go to marks and bleeds and I use, and this is clicked, you'll get the bleed area, but you don't need that. I don't want, so I may be like, it may be turned on. I feel like I've had another class or two where it's automatically turned on and I keep telling students to turn it off. Mine is never on. I have to turn it on. So you may come across that, and that's where that is. And you can turn on all sorts of, like if I turn all this on, you'll see what happens. Save PDF. Oh, where did it put it? Oh, because it was already open. Don't save. Let's do that one more time. Oh, because there's nothing to print. File. It doesn't like it if you save over a file that's already open. File, save as. See what it goes. Or I have nothing in there, so that doesn't need to add anything. PDF, save, place. Oh, there it is. So now if I turn on all the printer's marks, it starts to add a ton of extra information into the corners. And this would all be used by the printer to know a certain amount of information. But you don't need to turn that on. I'm just showing you what it does. So make sure you turn that off, actually. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns about creating the Illustrator layout or questions about layouts? All right, cool. Thursday, we'll go over how to do this in InDesign. And then I'll go over the setup project, the practice project, and we'll be great. I'll leave it at that. I have more news for you on Thursday, but I'll tell you on Thursday. So, all right. Let me know if you have questions, comments, or concerns before that. All right. Take it easy, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.